Helga's scream echoed through the forest as her bloodied hands grasped desperately at the dark figure carrying her son. "Give me back my Leif. Give me back my son." Her nails dug into the damp earth as the slender, shadowy creature vanished among the snowy trees, taking with it the last light of her life. Thank you for joining us in this story. Our channel is just beginning its journey, and every subscription means the world to us, helping us reach that crucial milestone of the first 1,000 subscribers. If you find yourself drawn to tales of Viking honor, mystery, and human struggle, please consider subscribing. We'd also love to hear where you're watching from, so leave a comment telling us your city. Your support keeps this project alive and growing. The morning sun struggled beneath a thick weave of gray clouds, filtering feebly through the oppressive canopy of ancient pines that surrounded the settlement of Ravnholm. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and evergreen resin, a chill that bit beneath layers of wool and leather. Frost glazed the brittle grass and the edges of frozen puddles, glimmering faintly as the weak light touched them. The village itself lay still, half shrouded in mist, as if slumbering beneath a quiet shroud of winter's grasp. Within a humble cabin on the edge of the settlement, Helga Thorsdottir stirred from restless sleep. She was 28 winters old, her frame slender but hardened by years of toil and loss. The room was dim, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth and the pale light seeping through a small window fogged with breath. The scent of smoked fish and dried herbs lingered faintly, a testament to the rituals of survival in this harsh land. Helga's dark blonde hair, often braided in the modest style befitting a widow, lay tangled across a rough linen pillow. Her pale face, marked by a thin scar tracing just beneath her chin, betrayed the strength beneath her worn exterior. She breathed shallowly, listening to the quiet rhythm of the cabin, the creaking of settling wood, the shifting shadows cast by flickering firelight, and the soft, steady breathing of her son. Leif, her 5-year-old boy, lay curled beneath a patchwork of furs in the corner of the room. His golden hair spilled over the pillow like threads of summer sunlight, his small chest rising and falling with innocence untouched by the harshness that surrounded them. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the morning cold, and his eyes, blue as the deep fjords, were closed in peaceful sleep. In this small, fragile oasis, Helga found her only solace. The years since her husband, Eirik Håkonsson, fell in battle had been grim and unyielding. The loss carved a hollow place within her, a wound that never healed but instead festered in the cold silence of solitude. She was no stranger to hard labor, to the biting winds of the north, nor to the suspicion that clung to her like a shadow. The clan regarded her as an outsider now, a woman unanchored and dangerous in her quietness. Slowly, she rose from the straw bedding, her movements deliberate and measured. Her hands, calloused from years of weaving and gathering, reached out to adjust the skins wrapped tightly around Leif. The child shifted, his small fingers twitching as he stirred beneath the warmth. Helga's breath caught in her throat, a flare of tenderness igniting in her chest. Outside, the wind whispered through the towering pines, carrying with it the faint crackle of ice breaking free from branches and the distant call of ravens perched on skeletal limbs. The forest was a living entity, ancient and indifferent, its secrets buried beneath layers of snow and shadow. It was both sanctuary and threat, a place where the old magic lingered and the forgotten spirits stirred. Helga dressed quickly in her worn woolen tunic, its rough fibers scratching her pale skin, and wrapped herself in a thick cloak lined with wolf fur, a memento from her late husband. The heavy fabric settled on her shoulders like a weight, a shield against the biting cold and the judgment of others. She tied a faded leather strap around her waist, where a small pouch of herbs and a hunting knife hung, tools essential for the day ahead. The cabin's sparse furnishings creaked under the strain of winter's chill. A simple wooden table bore the remains of the previous night's meal: dried bread, a chunk of smoked fish, and a cracked wooden bowl stained with the memory of thin porridge. A cluster of ceramic jars held dried roots and powders, their contents gathered from the forest in past seasons: remedies and poisons, mysteries of the earth whispered from mother to daughter. Helga moved quietly to the hearth, coaxing the last embers back to life. Her fingers, nimble despite their roughness, arranged kindling and struck flint against steel, sparks igniting a flicker of flame. The fire grew slowly, sending tendrils of smoke curling toward the low ceiling. She reached for a small iron pot, filling it with water drawn from the frozen stream behind the cabin. As the water heated, the room filled with the comforting aroma of roasting grain. Helga prepared a simple breakfast of oat porridge, thick and hearty, sweetened with a pinch of wild honey she had gathered during a brief thaw weeks before. She stirred carefully, mindful of the delicate balance between nourishment and scarcity. Leif's eyes fluttered open, his gaze adjusting to the dim light. His small voice broke the silence with a soft, eager plea. "Tell me again, Mother, about the elves." Helga smiled faintly, the warmth of her son's curiosity breaking through her weariness. She settled beside him, wrapping her arms around his slender frame. The child's innocence was a fragile beacon amid the encroaching shadows of their world. "The elves of light dwell where the sun first touches the mountains," she began, her voice low and steady, weaving the tales her own mother once told her. "They shine with the glow of dawn, singing songs carried on the breeze. But the dark elves, the Svartálfar, they live in places where even the gods dare not look. In caves beneath the earth, where shadows crawl and whispers twist like thorns." Leif's eyes widened, shining with wonder and fear. "Are they real, Mother?" Helga hesitated, her heart tightening with the weight of unspoken truths. "They are as real as the frost on the trees, little one. We do not speak of them lightly, for their touch is cold and their ways cruel." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the pendant his father had given him, a wolf's tooth tied with sinew to a leather thong. It was a talisman against the dark, or so he believed. Helga kissed his forehead, her lips lingering on the cool skin, a silent promise to protect him from whatever lurked beyond the veil. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to drift lazily from the sky, settling on the roof like fragile feathers. The world was turning soft and white, a blanket to hide secrets and sorrows alike. Helga bundled Leif into his thick gray wool tunic and wrapped a coarse scarf around his neck. She tied him securely to her back with a sturdy woolen sash, a method learned from her husband during years spent foraging in the wild. With care born of necessity, she lifted him until his small arms clung to her tightly. The forest awaited. It was both a source of life and a harbinger of peril. The scent of pine and damp moss filled her lungs as she stepped beyond the threshold of her cabin. Snow crunched beneath heavy leather boots, a rhythm marking the passage of time and purpose. The village of Ravenholm lay silent behind her, its wooden huts and smoke curling from low chimneys now faint shapes through the veil of falling snow. The people within, her neighbors and clanmates, watched from a distance, their glances wary, their whispers like cold winds slicing through the heart. Helga felt their eyes behind her, the weight of their judgment pressing as heavily as the winter air. She was alone, a widow with no kin to shield her from suspicion. In the eyes of many, she had become a ghost, a shadow on the edge of their world, her grief twisted into something strange and wild. But Helga carried her son, her only light in the gathering dusk. She would not yield to their doubts or fears. The dense forest enveloped her, a cathedral of ancient trees towering overhead, their branches heavy with snow. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft whispers of the wind and the rhythmic crunch of footsteps. The cold air bit at exposed skin, leaving a biting sting that quickly numbed. Helga moved steadily, her senses alert to every nuance of the wilderness. Helga's skin prickled with an old, familiar dread, a warning her heart could not ignore. She called softly to her son, his name a thread anchoring her to the present. Leif. His small form turned toward her, eyes bright but questioning. And then, the shadow moved. A figure emerged between the trunks, tall and slender, its skin a dull gray that seemed to drink in the light. Its face was angular and sharp, devoid of warmth or mercy. Eyes black as the void locked onto Leif's small frame with a hunger that chilled the blood. Time slowed. Helga's heart thundered as she reached for him, desperation fueling her limbs. The creature moved with preternatural swiftness, a blur of darkness against the white snow. Her hands grasped at empty air, then brushed against cold, leathery flesh, smooth and unyielding like the surface of ancient stone. A cry tore from her throat, raw and broken. No! Her voice shattered the fragile silence as the creature lifted Leif, the boy's arms flailing and reaching for her. The world narrowed to this moment, the agony of loss and the burning fire of maternal fury. Helga lunged forward, every fiber of her being screaming to hold onto the last beacon of her shattered life. But the shadow was gone, swallowed by the depths of the forest, taking with it the warmth and light of her son. In the bitter cold, Helga stood alone, her breath ragged, her hands stained with blood and bark. The snow continued to fall, a silent witness to the beginning of a darkness that would not be denied. The forest hung heavy with silence, thickened by the relentless fall of snow that blurred the edges of the world. Helga's boots pressed into the soft white, each step muffled except for the faint crunch beneath her weight. Her breath came in shallow bursts, a rhythm of urgency and exhaustion intertwined. The cold bit through her cloak, but she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed by a single thought: find Leif. The deeper she ventured, the more the forest grew wild and untamed. Ancient pines, bowed under thick blankets of snow, loomed like silent sentinels. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and frost, but beneath it, a subtle, unsettling undercurrent lingered, a faint trace of decay and cold metal that gnawed at her senses. She pressed on, clutching the knife at her belt, her fingers tight around its worn hilt. Suddenly, a faint sound brushed against the stillness. A soft cry, fragile and trembling, barely louder than the falling snow itself. Helga froze, every nerve alert. The sound came again, this time more desperate, a whisper of suffering carried on the wind. Her heart twisted. She crouched low, eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. There, partially hidden beneath a fallen branch dusted with snow, lay a small figure, a child, no older than Leif, trembling and pale as the winter itself. The boy's tunic was torn, his hair matted with dirt and frost. His eyes, wide and filled with fear, locked onto hers with a silent plea. Helga's breath caught, the urgency of her own quest colliding with the stark reality of this child's peril. He was alone, lost, vulnerable. For a moment, the cold forest seemed to close in around them both, the desperate mother and this frightened stranger. Helga's heart ached in recognition. The child's thin frame betrayed hunger, exhaustion, and a terror she knew too well. The snow had already begun to cling to his skin, threatening to steal what warmth remained. She knelt beside him carefully, mindful not to startle. "Who are you?" she whispered, voice low but steady, a thread of comfort in the frozen wilderness. The boy's lips parted, trembling. I was taken," he choked out. "By the shadows, the dark ones. They said I belonged to them." Helga's pulse quickened. Shadows, dark ones. The Svartálfar. Her mind flashed to the creature that had seized Leif, their cold skin and merciless eyes. This child, another victim of their cruel grasp. Helga's instincts screamed at her: protect, fight, survive. But alongside that, a gnawing fear surfaced. Could she save them both? Could she even save Leif? The boy shivered violently, and Helga reached for her cloak, draping it over his slender shoulders. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained firm. "You're safe now. I will not let the shadows claim you." He clung to her words, but the terror in his eyes refused to fully fade. "They said I was cursed," he whispered, "that their mark would come for me soon." Helga's throat tightened. The Svartálfar's touch was not merely physical. It was a binding, a theft of soul and spirit. To be marked was to be tethered to darkness itself. She looked down at his small hands, stained with dirt and cold. "Tell me your name," she urged gently. "Bjorn," he managed, voice cracking. A name like a fragile ember amidst the gathering night. Helga's mind raced. Taking in Bjorn meant slowing her pursuit, sharing the burden she had not asked for. The forest knew no mercy, and the Svartálfar were relentless hunters. Yet to leave him here, alone and defenseless, was unthinkable. A bitter wind swept through the trees, carrying the faintest echo of distant, unnatural whispers that chilled her deeper than the frost. Time was slipping away. Her heart waged war between survival and compassion. Bjorn's gaze met hers again, pleading silently. His body trembled with each breath, fragile as the winter frost about to shatter. Helga's fingers brushed his tangled hair back from his pale forehead. "I will protect you," she vowed. "Come with me." She rose slowly, steadying the boy as she wrapped her arms around him to shield against the cold. Leif's weight on her back was a constant reminder of what she had to save. The son who had been taken, now a shadow in her heart. Bjorn's small hands curled tightly into her cloak, clinging to the only warmth he had known in hours, maybe days. Helga could feel the tremors of fear beneath her touch, but also a flicker of trust beginning to kindle. Together, they pressed forward, the forest closing in like a living trap. Each step was heavy with dread, but also fierce resolve. The Svartálfar's presence lingered, a dark pulse beneath the frozen earth, watching, waiting. Helga's mind grappled with the impossible weight of her choices. She was a widow already marked by loss, carrying a wounded son whose spirit had been touched by darkness. Now she bore the fragile life of another child, a stranger whose fate was tied to the same nightmare. The clan had scorned her warnings, labeling her mad. But here, beneath the ancient trees and swirling snow, she was more than a woman broken by grief. She was a shield, a warrior bound by love and desperation. As twilight bled into gloom, Helga paused beside a fallen tree, the darkening sky a veil over the endless white. Bjorn's breath was shallow, his body weak, but his eyes held a flicker of hope. "We must find shelter," Helga murmured, scanning the shadows for any sign of refuge. "And soon." Bjorn nodded faintly, his voice barely audible. "They will come." She understood. Svartálfar were patient hunters, masters of shadow and fear. They would not relent. Helga's jaw clenched, the fire of defiance igniting anew. She would not let the darkness claim another child. Not while her own blood still beat. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder, ensuring Leif was secure, then took Bjorn's hand in hers. The boy's grip was weak but determined. Together, they moved deeper into the forest, two fragile lives entwined by fate and resolve. The snow whispered around them, silent witness to the choice made in that frozen moment, to stand against the shadows, no matter the cost. Helga's eyes hardened against the gathering night. The path ahead was uncertain and perilous. But she would not turn away. Not now. Not ever. The forest's cold embrace slowly gave way to the faint outlines of Ravenholm, its wooden roofs dusted with snow, smoke curling upward from low chimneys like thin fingers of warmth in the unforgiving air. Helga moved with measured steps, the weight of Leif on her back and the fragile form of Bjorn cradled against her side pressing into her very bones. Each breath she drew was a small victory against the biting chill, but her mind was anything but at ease. Shelter was near, yet the danger that shadowed them remained as palpable as the frost beneath their boots. Her eyes flicked constantly over the snow-dusted path, alert to Helga carefully set Bjorn down on a woven rush mat near the fire, her eyes softening with a tenderness that belied the steel beneath her skin. The boy shivered violently, his lips blue and cracked, his thin frame trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Without hesitation, Helga shed her heavy cloak and wrapped him in the thick wool fur her husband had once worn, a talisman against the cold and the darkness alike. Leif, still tied to Helga's back, stirred as the warmth of the cabin seeped into his chilled limbs. His eyes fluttered open, the eerie green glowed dimmer in the firelight, but unmistakable. Yet there was no fear in his gaze now, only a fragile calm, the quiet understanding of a child forever altered. Helga knelt beside Bjorn, her hands gentle but purposeful as she unwrapped the muddy rags clinging to the child's thin body. The boy flinched but did not pull away, his eyes wide and dark, shadowed with exhaustion and memories too heavy for a child so young. Her fingers traced the bruises and frost-bitten patches on his skin, careful not to cause more pain. A thin strip of cloth fell away to reveal a faint marking on his wrist, a symbol etched in a language old as the earth itself. It was not a rune she recognized from her own people, but its sharp lines and jagged edges spoke of ancient power and a curse perhaps even older than the Svartálfar. Bjorn's gaze followed Helga's hand, his voice barely a whisper. "It is the mark of the Shadowborn," he said in broken Old Norse, his accent ragged but clear. "They said it means the dark blood runs in me now." Helga's breath caught. The boy's words were a bitter echo of her own fears, a grim confirmation that the darkness was not so easily cast off. She squeezed his small hand, a silent vow passing between them. Whatever the cost, she would protect these children from the shadows that sought to claim them. Slowly, she fetched a small bowl of warm water and a cloth from a wooden chest. Her movements were methodical and tender as she began to wash the grime and frost from Bjorn's face and hands. The boy's eyes closed briefly, lips parting as if to speak, but finding no strength. Helga could feel the tremors beneath her touch, fear, pain, and a lingering sense of otherness that no amount of cleansing could erase. Leif watched quietly from the warmth of the firelight, his small fingers tracing the carved wolf tooth pendant at his throat. He seemed to understand, in the way only children can, that this stranger shared a fate shadowed by the same dark hand. Though the green light in his own eyes unsettled her, Helga saw in him a quiet determination, a fragile hope clinging to the edge of despair. Helga fetched a simple meal from the kitchen bench, coarse bread, salted fish, and a small pot of honey she had hidden away. The scent of the food filled the room, a balm against the cold and the silence. She sat beside the hearth, placing a piece of bread in Bjorn's trembling hands. At first, he resisted, staring at the food as though it were foreign, but hunger soon overcame fear, and he nibbled slowly, his small body drawing strength from the warmth and sustenance. As the minutes passed, the cabin seemed to breathe with them, the fire's glow softening the harsh lines of their ordeal. Helga leaned forward, her voice low and soothing. "You are safe here," she said gently, weaving the words with ancient power learned from her mother and grandmother, women who had known the delicate balance between life and death. "No shadow will touch you while you are beneath this roof." Bjorn's eyes filled with tears, the weight of his suffering briefly breaking through the shell of silence. "They came in the night," he whispered. "The dark ones. They said I was chosen, like your Leif. They said there is no escape." Helga's heart clenched. The Svartálfar did not take children at random. Their touch was a claim, a binding to forces that twisted the soul and stained the bloodline. The boy's fear was a mirror of her own, a shared burden that neither time nor prayer could easily lift. She reached out, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead, the gesture as much a shield as a comfort. Bjorn's small body shuddered beneath her touch, but he did not pull away. In that fragile moment, Between the crackling fire and the whispering winds outside, a bond was forged, one of shared loss, fierce protection, and the fragile hope that even in shadow there could be light. Leif stirred again, his gaze meeting Bjorn's across the fire. The two children sat in uneasy silence, the unspoken understanding passing between them like a fragile thread. Helga watched them closely, noting the boy's cautious glances toward the worn wolf tooth at Leif's neck, and the way Leif's fingers flexed protectively around the pendant. There was a story in these small gestures, a history of loss and resilience told without words. Helga understood that Bjorn had been torn from a world not unlike her own, marked by pain and haunted by shadows that stretched beyond the reach of firelight. The hours slipped by, the night deepening beyond the thick wooden walls. Helga busied herself tending the fire, preparing salves made from forest herbs to soothe the bruises and frostbite that marred Bjorn's skin. Her hands moved with practiced care, but beneath the surface, a tension coiled tight like a serpent ready to strike. She knew the Svartálfar would not rest. They were patient hunters, waiting for the moment when fear weakened their prey. Helga's mind raced through old songs and tales, searching for a blessing or a ward that might keep them safe through the long night. Astrid, the village healer, had once told her stories of runes etched in stone and bone, magic born from the ancient earth and the breath of the gods. Helga fingered the amber amulet at her throat, the last gift from her husband, and whispered a prayer to Freya, the goddess who guarded the boundaries between life and death. Outside, the wind howled low, carrying with it the faintest echo of voices not meant for mortal ears. Helga's breath caught. Somewhere beyond the safety of the cabin, the shadows stirred. Bjorn's voice broke the silence, barely audible above the fire's crackle. "Will they come here?" he asked, eyes wide and glistening. Helga met his gaze, the fierce light of a mother's promise burning in her own. "They may," she said quietly, "but they will find only a shield, and a fury they cannot break." The boy nodded, clutching the fur tighter around his shoulders. Leif, still nestled close, reached out hesitantly and touched Bjorn's hand. The gesture was simple, yet profound, linking them in a silent pact of survival. For a moment, the cabin was filled not with fear, but with a fragile warmth, a flicker of hope amid the encroaching darkness. Helga settled herself between the hearth and the sleeping children, her eyes scanning the shadows beyond the doorway. Her mind was a tempest of memories and fears, but beneath it all, a stubborn flame refused to die. She would protect them, both of them, against gods, men, and monsters alike. For in this harsh land of ice and shadow, love was the fiercest weapon of all. The wind whispered through the branches of the ancient pines surrounding Ravnholm, carrying with it murmurs that twisted and curled like smoke. News of the dark night's horror had spread beyond the village's borders, reaching ears both curious and hungry for conflict. Where once the forest had been a veil of isolation, now it was a stage upon which suspicion, fear, and old grudges played out with sharpened tongues and restless hearts. Helga's cabin, a solitary block of timber and thatch nestled at the edge of the settlement, had become a silent beacon, its rough walls sheltering not only her and her son, but the fragile hope tethered to the boy Bjorn. Each day that passed without the Svartálfar's return deepened the unease among the villagers, but it also stirred a restless tide beyond their borders, where rival clans and wandering hunters caught wind of the tale. It began with the hunters, men who followed the whispered trails of the forest, skilled in tracking the movements of beasts, both mortal and not. They came to Ravnholm under the guise of sharing news, but carried with them the weight of challenge. Their eyes, sharp as flint, lingered too long on Helga's stained hands, on the strange glow in Leif's now green eyes, and on the foreign boy concealed within the widow's humble walls. One morning, as the icy sun fought through heavy clouds, a group of 4 men arrived at the village's edge. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered warrior named Torvald, bore scars earned in battles. Torvald's eyes flickered toward Helga's cabin, where the silhouette of a woman stood framed against the frosted window, a figure both frail and unyielding. Strength born from desperation can be a fire, or a storm that consumes all it touches. The hunter's presence unsettled the village. Their talk of Svartálfar stirred long-buried fears and old superstitions. Some whispered that Helga's ordeal was a curse. Others claimed it a sign of the god's displeasure. It was not long before the murmurs turned to overt suspicion, the wary glances to cold avoidance. Helga felt the shift like a blade pressed against her back. Even as she tended to Leif and Bjorn, washing the strange markings from their flesh and whispering prayers for protection, the weight of the clan's judgment bore down heavier than the winter's chill. The amber amulet at her throat seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, a tether to memories of her late husband and a shield against the growing storm. One evening, as the dusk deepened into a velvet black, a messenger arrived from a distant tribe, one known for its ruthless warriors and cunning sorcerers. His message was curt and laced with threat. The darkness you harbor draws eyes beyond these woods. We watch. We wait. The Svartálfar's mark is no accident, and the child is a prize worth claiming. Prepare yourselves, for the shadows have many hands. The note, sealed with a jagged rune unfamiliar even to Astrid, the village healer, sent a ripple of fear through Ravenholm. Astrid herself came to Helga's cabin that night, her face grave beneath the linen scarf wrapped tightly against the cold. "Helga," she began, her voice low and steady, "the world beyond our village stirs. This is no longer just our fight. You carry more than your own burden now. Protect your son, and this boy, at all costs, for the eyes watching are as cold and merciless as the night." Helga nodded, the firelight flickering in her sharp, determined eyes. She knew the road ahead was fraught with peril, yet retreat was no longer an option. The children depended on her strength, her cunning, her unyielding will to shield them from the darkness that sought to claim their souls. Days turned into weeks, and with each dawn, the tension tightened like a noose around Ravenholm. Warriors from neighboring tribes arrived, some seeking alliance, others drawn by the promise of gold or the thrill of hunting what they believed to be a cursed child. Their presence fractured the fragile peace, turning the village into a crucible of distrust. Gunnar's authority was tested. Some of his council whispered that Helga's defiance threatened the clan's honor, that harboring Bjorn, a boy marked by dark magic, was inviting doom upon them all. Others, quieter but no less fearful, urged caution, fearing that the Svartálfar's reach extended beyond mortal comprehension. Helga found herself caught between worlds. The intimate warmth of her cabin, where Leif's soft breaths mingled with Bjorn's fragile whispers, and the cold, watchful eyes of the clan outside, where loyalty wavered like flickering flames. One night, as a harsh wind rattled the cabin's shutters, Gunnar visited her alone. His footsteps were heavy, echoing on the frozen ground. Inside, the fire threw long shadows across the rough-hewn walls, and Helga sat by the hearth, Leif nestled in her arms, Bjorn curled beside her wrapped in thick furs. Gunnar's gaze was unreadable. "Helga," he said slowly, "the clan grows restless. Many question your purpose, and the danger your son now brings. We cannot stand divided against a threat that grows stronger each day." Helga lifted her head, meeting his eyes with quiet defiance. "Leif is no threat. Bjorn is no curse. They are children, stolen and marked by those who dwell in shadow. I will protect them, even if the world turns against me." Gunnar's face hardened. "Protection comes at a cost, woman. The darkness you challenge will not wait behind these walls. It will come for the boy, and for us all. You must decide where your loyalty lies." The weight of his words hung between them, thick as the smoke curling from the hearth. Helga's heart pounded with the unbearable weight of the choice before her, to shield her children and risk alienation, or yield to the clan's fear and betray the fragile hope she carried within. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the village in silence. Yet beneath that quiet, the currents of fear and suspicion surged like a gathering storm. As the night deepened, a distant howl shattered the stillness, a mournful cry that carried on the wind, a reminder that the shadows were not idle. The Svartálfar watched, patient and unyielding, waiting for the moment when the bonds of love and loyalty might unravel. Helga tightened her grip on Leif, her gaze sharp in the flickering firelight. The fight was no longer just for her son, but for the fragile light still burning in the hearts of those who dared to hope. And as the world outside closed in, she steeled herself for the days to come, knowing that to protect what she loved, she must face the judgment of her own people, the threat of strangers, and the relentless darkness that sought to claim the boy marked by shadows. The forest beyond Ravenholm grew darker still, and with it, the fate of the widow and her sons hung in precarious balance, between light and shadow, belief and doubt, survival and sacrifice. The cold had settled deep into every crevice of Ravenholm, the village wrapped in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the thick blankets of snow piling against the wooden walls. The skies above churned with low, oppressive clouds, blotting out the weak winter sun and casting the village into long shadows. It was as though the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm. Inside Helga's cabin, the air was thick with tension. The fire crackled weakly, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn timber walls, but it could not chase away the chill that clung to her bones. Leif lay restless, the strange green glow in his eyes dimming and flaring unpredictably, as if a battle raged just beneath his skin. Bjorn sat quietly nearby, his small hands nervously twisting the wolf-tooth pendant at his throat, his gaze flickering toward every flicker of movement beyond the window. Helga sat at the hearth, her face a mask of controlled fury and fatigue. Her fingers absently traced the amber amulet resting against her chest, an echo of her late husband's strength, and she whispered a prayer to Freya, goddess of love and battle, seeking guidance and protection. The weight of her responsibility felt unbearable. The village had already turned its back on her, whispers of madness trailing her shadow like a suffocating fog. Now, with the Svartálfar's shadow creeping ever closer, there was no longer room for doubt or hesitation. The sudden, sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile calm. Helga's hand tightened around the handle of her knife as she rose slowly, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Outside, the snow was falling harder, cloaking the world in white, but the sound of heavy boots, deliberate, unyielding, echoed across the frozen landscape. The knock came again, insistent and demanding. Helga hesitated, then moved to open the door a crack, her piercing gray-blue eyes scanning the dark shapes beyond. Standing there, framed by the swirling snow, was Gunnar Hrogarsson, the clan leader himself. His presence was forbidding, his face weathered and stern beneath the hoods of his heavy cloak. The silver bracelet on his wrist caught a flash of pale light, a symbol of the authority he wielded, but there was something else in his gaze tonight, a cold edge, as if the weight of impossible decisions pressed down upon him. "Helga," he said quietly, voice low but carrying the weight of command, "it is time. The clan demands answers, and the darkness draws near. We cannot wait longer." Her heart tightened. This was the moment she had feared, the inevitable reckoning with those who once called her kin, but now regarded her with suspicion and fear. "I will meet your counsel," Helga replied steadily, her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her chest. "But know this, I stand for my son and the boy I shelter. We will not bow to shadows or whispers." Gunnar nodded once, sharply, then stepped back into the night, the crunch of his boots fading into the howling wind. As the door closed behind him, Helga's breath came in shallow bursts. She turned to the two boys. Helga stepped forward, her cloak drawn tightly around her, the amber amulet glinting at her throat. Her gaze swept across the gathered faces. Friends turned doubters, allies turned skeptics, and she spoke, voice clear and unwavering. "My son was taken by the Svartálfar," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "I have seen their shadows, felt their cold breath upon my skin. I fought for Leif with all that remains of me, and I saved him. But the mark they left upon him is no simple curse. It binds him to their world, a tether neither I nor any of you can sever." A murmur rippled through the hall. Some shook their heads, unwilling to accept such dark truths. Others stared in pained silence. Gunnar raised a hand, silencing the room. "If what you say is true, then we face a threat greater than any we have known. But doubt lingers, for how can we know this is not a nightmare born of grief?" Helga's eyes burned with quiet fury. "I offer no illusions. I am no seer, no sorceress. I am a mother fighting to keep her child from the shadows that would claim his soul." From the back of the hall, Ragnar Bjornsson, the village blacksmith, stepped forward. His normally steady green eyes flickered with unease. "And what of the boy you brought with you?" he asked, nodding toward Bjorn, who clung silently to the edge of the gathering. Helga met his gaze without faltering. "Bjorn was taken, too. He bears a mark older than any rune we know, a sign of the Shadowborn. If we do not stand together, more children will vanish into the darkness beyond our reach." The hall grew colder, the firelight flickering as if afraid to linger. The weight of Gunnar's gaze settled on Helga, heavy as iron. A voice from the crowd broke the silence, a grizzled elder, his face lined with the map of 1,000 winters. "If the Svartálfar come for these children, it is not only a battle of steel, but of souls. Are you prepared to face what lies beyond the veil?" Helga's fingers curled tightly around the amulet. "I will face the darkness with my last breath, if need be. For them. For every life the shadows seek to claim." Gunnar nodded slowly. "Then we prepare. Tonight, the clan stands united. We will guard the village, watch the woods, and be ready for the fight that approaches." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a chorus of eerie whispers that seemed to twist and curl like smoke around the wooden beams of the longhouse. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, the firelight flickering in their haunted eyes. Helga's cabin was transformed into a bastion. Runes of protection were carved deep into the doorframes and windowsills, smoldering embers laid in precise patterns to ward off evil. Astrid, the healer, moved among the people with quiet determination, chanting blessings and scattering herbs of warding. Her aged hands traced symbols on Leif and Bjorn's foreheads, soft words weaving a fragile shield against the encroaching dark. The hours stretched like a drawn blade, the moon climbing slowly toward its zenith as the village braced beneath the heavy sky. Helga sat by the hearth once more, her thoughts a turbulent storm. She watched Leif's eyes, now glowing faintly in the firelight, and felt the weight of the clan's expectations pressing down on her. Trust was fragile, a thread stretched taut by fear and uncertainty. The first howl shattered the night. Low, mournful cries rolling across the frozen fields like a death knell. The Svartálfar had come. Outside, shadows gathered like a living wave, pale figures slipping silently between the trees. Their skin seemed to drink the light, their eyes pits of endless black. The ground trembled beneath their steps, a rhythm that spoke of ancient hunger and unyielding will. The village erupted into motion. Warriors grasped their weapons tightly, faces set with grim determination. Gunnar's voice rose above the chaos, a roar of command that shook the very air. Helga stood at the edge of the village, knife in hand, the amber amulet warm against her chest. Bjorn clung to her side, eyes wide but steady. Leif stood before her, small but fierce, the strange glow in his eyes a beacon in the growing dark. The Svartálfar advanced, shadows slipping between the trees like smoke, their footsteps as silent as death. Yet Helga felt no fear, only the fierce fire of a mother's love and a warrior's resolve. The clash was brutal but contained. Steel met shadow and flashes of cold light, cries and growls mingling in the frozen air. Helga moved with desperation and fury, each strike a prayer for her son's soul. Through the chaos, the tallest Svartálfar emerged, an embodiment of shadow and malice. Its voice, a rasp like gravel sliding over stone, echoed through the village square. "You cannot keep what is ours," it hissed, eyes locked on Leif. "The blood calls. The mark binds." Helga stepped forward, voice steady and strong. "Leif is my son. He belongs to me, not to shadows or darkness." A tense stillness fell. The creature's gaze bore into her, ancient and unrelenting. "Then prove it," it whispered. In that moment, Helga's world narrowed to a single truth. To protect her son, to save the fragile flicker of humanity within him, she would risk everything. The clan watched, breath held, as the widow who had been scorned stood defiant against the eternal night. The fire inside her blazed brighter than any shadow could consume. And as the first light of dawn began to soften the edges of the world, the battle for Leif's soul and the fate of Ravenholm hung in the balance, a fragile hope forged in the heart of darkness. The pale morning light filtered through the frost-coated windows of Helga's cabin, casting long, soft shadows across the worn wooden floor. Outside, the world lay quiet beneath a heavy blanket of snow, the forest's breath lingering like a whispered secret. Inside, the air was thick with a fragile calm, the echoes of the night's violence still pulsing faintly beneath the surface. The longhouse's once skeptical walls now seemed to hold a different energy, a tentative hope beginning to take root. Helga sat near the hearth, her hands resting on Leif's small shoulders as the boy sat cross-legged on a fur hide, his green-tinged eyes fixed on a simple wooden carving she had made for him during the long, restless nights. The faint glow within those eyes no longer unsettled her as it had at first. Instead, it was a reminder, a symbol of the trial they had endured, the darkness they had faced together. Bjorn was nearby, wrapped tightly in a heavy cloak, his gaze distant yet steady. Though still fragile, he breathed with a rhythm that spoke of healing. The night's battle had left scars deeper than those visible on skin. The village of Ravenholm now bore the weight of a shared truth, one that had fractured old certainties and forced hearts to reckon with the shadows lurking beneath their world. Yet amid the raw edges of fear and suspicion, a quiet transformation had begun. For days following the confrontation, the villagers had watched Helga with a mixture of awe and cautious respect. Gunnar, the clan's leader, no longer dismissed her as mad or deluded. Instead, his eyes held the weight of understanding. The understanding that she had faced the darkness not as a desperate woman consumed by grief, but as a warrior unyielding in her love and loyalty. One afternoon, as the sun fought weakly through the gray skies, Gunnar visited Helga's cabin once more. His footsteps were heavy but measured, a steady echo against the snow-crusted ground. He wore the blue tunic of leadership, the silver bracelet glinting faintly beneath his thick cloak. His face, worn by seasons of battle and hardship, softened as he stepped inside the modest shelter. Helga rose to meet him, the sharp lines of her face softened by exhaustion yet strengthened by resolve. Leif sat quietly, his small hands clutching the wolf-tooth pendant at his neck. Bjorn, seated near the hearth, looked up, his dark eyes reflecting a flicker of cautious hope. Gunnar's gaze swept over the room, lingering on the two children before settling on Helga. "You fought the darkness with courage none of us could muster," he said slowly, voice low but firm. "Not just for your son, but for all of Ravenholm." Helga's eyes met his, unwavering. "I did what any mother would do," she replied quietly. "But the fight is not over." The Svartálfar still watch from the shadows. They wait. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. The stories whispered in shadow had become a shared narrative, binding the villagers together in a new way. The fear that once isolated Helga now wove her into the fabric of Ravnholm's fate. Days passed, and the seasons crept forward, the relentless cold giving way to the tentative stirrings of spring. The snow melted from the forest floor, revealing the earth beneath, a canvas for new beginnings. Helga's cabin was no longer a place of solitude but a gathering point, where she prepared salves and taught the children of the village the healing arts she had honed in grief and necessity. Leif grew stronger each day, his eyes still hinting at the strange light within, but tempered by the warmth of his mother's love and the safety woven by the clan's protection. Bjorn, too, found a fragile place among them, his fears slowly giving way to trust. The village, once divided by suspicion, began to heal alongside the children marked by shadow. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the distant mountains, a quiet ceremony was held beneath the ancient oaks near the edge of the forest. Gunnar stood alongside Helga and Astrid, their faces solemn in the fading light. The villagers gathered in a circle, their breaths forming soft clouds in the chill air. Astrid stepped forward, her hands raised to the sky as she murmured blessings in the old tongue, invoking the protection of the gods and the sacred runes. The clan's warriors laid fresh carvings of strength and warding on the trees and stones, a tapestry of defense woven from faith and resolve. Helga held Leif's hand tightly, feeling the faint warmth beneath the green rune that marked his wrist. Bjorn stood close, his small fingers entwined with hers, a silent promise that they would face whatever darkness came as one. As the ceremony closed, Gunnar's voice carried across the silent forest. "We have been tested by shadow and doubt," he said, "and found stronger in our unity. Let this day mark not only a shield against the darkness, but a bond among us all." The villagers echoed the vow, their voices rising in a chorus that mingled with the rustling leaves and the distant call of ravens. In the days that followed, Helga's role within Ravnholm shifted. No longer merely the widow on the edge, she became a symbol of resilience and fierce devotion. The clan looked to her not with suspicion, but with a grudging respect born from the truth she had endured. One evening, as the first stars pierced the twilight sky, Gunnar returned to Helga's cabin with a small carved box. Inside lay a finely wrought silver brooch, etched with ancient runes of protection, a gift and a token of acceptance. "For your strength," he said simply. "May it remind you that the clan stands with you." Helga accepted the brooch, her fingers trembling not with fear, but with a quiet gratitude. The weight of his gesture was more profound than words could capture, a bridge mended between isolation and belonging. As she pinned the brooch to her cloak, Leif reached up and touched the symbol gently, his green eyes reflecting a new light, one not born solely of shadow, but tempered by love and hope. Bjorn watched them both, a faint smile breaking through the weariness etched on his young face. In that moment, surrounded by the fragile warmth of kinship, the shadows that had haunted their lives seemed to recede, not vanished, but held at bay by the enduring strength of human resolve. Helga knew the darkness would return. The Svartálfar's patience was as deep as the ancient earth. But she was no longer alone. The clan's fierce warriors would stand beside her. The healer's wisdom would guide them. And the children, marked though they were, would grow strong in the light of a community reborn. For a mother's love was a shield no shadow could break, a fire that burned beyond the longest night. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of the gods and the ancient forest, Helga Thor's daughter, widow, warrior, and guardian, embraced the uncertain dawn, ready to face whatever storms still waited beyond the horizon. With her sons by her side, and the clan reclaiming her as one of their own. The first blush of spring crept slowly over Ravnholm, softening the harsh edges of winter's grasp. The snow receded like a fading shadow, revealing a land stirred awake, tentative but alive. The ancient pines, heavy with lingering frost, began to shimmer as the sun stretched its pale fingers across the horizon. In this fragile dawn, the village stirred quietly, its rhythms shifting in time with the thaw. Helga stood at the edge of the forest, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth rising around her like an old song. The wolf fur cloak, heavy yet comforting, hung loosely over her shoulders, the silver brooch gifted by Gunnar catching the morning light. Her eyes, still sharp and vigilant, softened as they took in the awakening world. Leif stood beside her, his small hand resting trustingly in hers, the green glow in his eyes now tempered by something gentler, something almost human again. Bjorn lingered nearby, his dark eyes scanning the woods with a wary curiosity that had grown quieter over the past weeks. The boy was no longer the trembling, haunted child who had stumbled into her life that cold night. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet strength born of survival, his small frame steadier, though still marked by the shadows that clung like a second skin. The village behind them was no longer the place of suspicion and whispered judgment that had once cast Helga out. The scars of fear had begun to heal, replaced by a cautious respect that folded slowly into acceptance. The longhouse, where many had once doubted her words, now echoed with stories of her courage, tales whispered by the firelight and carried on the breath of the wind. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead as Gunnar approached, his steps measured, the weight of leadership etched deep into his weathered face. His silver bracelet gleamed faintly beneath the cuff of his blue tunic, a symbol now firmly tied to the woman who had forged a new path for their people. Helga, his voice was steady, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had faced countless storms. The clan owes you more than words can say. What you have done, what you have endured, it has changed us all. She met his gaze, the fierce light in her eyes undimmed by the passing of seasons. I did what any mother would, she replied, her voice low but resolute. But this is only the beginning. The forest holds many secrets still, and the Svartálfar's shadows linger. We must remain vigilant. Gunnar nodded, a slow understanding deepening behind his stern exterior. We will stand with you, not as doubters, but as kin. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the ancient trees bearing witness to the fragile alliance between widow and clan leader. The weight of past divisions hung like mist, but so did the promise of new beginnings. As the sun crept higher, casting dappled light across the forest floor, Helga turned her gaze toward the village, where the first signs of renewal stirred. Children's laughter echoed faintly, carried on the breeze, a sound she hadn't dared hope to hear so soon. The women tended their gardens, breaking the frozen earth with tools sharpened by necessity and hope. Warriors prepared for the coming seasons, their faces set with determination but softened by the warmth of community. Within the longhouse, Astrid moved among her herbs and runes, her hands steady despite the years that weighed upon her. The healer's wisdom had been a beacon throughout the long nights, her blessings weaving a protective web that stretched beyond the village boundaries. She approached Helga's cabin often now, offering guidance and quiet counsel, their bond forged in shared hardship. Helga's home, once a solitary refuge perched on the village's edge, had become a gathering place. The rough timber walls echoed with whispered prayers and cautious laughter. Salves and potions lined the shelves, and the scent of drying herbs mingled with the faint warmth of lingering smoke. Here, the widow who had been cast aside found a new purpose, not only as protector but as teacher, as healer, as keeper of the fragile light that refused to be snuffed out. Leif, with his once luminous green eyes now softened, learned from his mother the ancient ways, how to read the forest signs, how to listen to the whispers beneath the wind. His steps grew steadier, his laughter more frequent, though the mark upon his wrist remained a silent reminder of the— Helga held Leif's hand, feeling the steady pulse beneath the green rune on his wrist. Bjorn stood close, his small fingers entwined with hers in a silent vow, an unspoken pact to face whatever darkness yet awaited, together. The ceremony was quiet but profound, a weaving of past and future, light and shadow. Gunnar's voice rose, steady and clear amid the murmurs. We have been tested by shadow and doubt, but from this night, we stand united. No darkness will tear us apart. Let this bond hold through all seasons. A chorus of agreement rose, voices strong and unwavering, carrying a promise beyond fear. The village had taken the first steps toward healing, toward a future shaped not by isolation but by shared strength. As the flames flickered and the night deepened, Helga looked out across the faces of those gathered, friends, neighbors, warriors, and children alike. There was still fear, still uncertainty, but woven through it all was a thread of something new, hope. In the days that followed, life in Ravenholm began to settle into a fragile harmony. The long nights gave way to warmer days, and with each sunrise, the village grew stronger. Helga continued her work, gathering herbs, teaching the children, tending wounds both seen and unseen. She carried the weight of her losses with quiet dignity, her scars a testament to battles fought in both flesh and spirit. Leif's laughter rang out more freely now, the eerie glow in his eyes a fading echo of the darkness that had once threatened to claim him. Bjorn's steps grew surer, his fears tempered by the steady rhythm of belonging. The clan, once fractured by fear and suspicion, wove tighter bonds of kinship. Old grudges softened, replaced by shared stories of endurance and sacrifice. Gunnar's leadership, tempered by the hard lessons of shadow and light, guided them toward a future where the ancient forest was no longer a place of terror, but a realm of reverence and respect. One morning, as the mist lifted from the river Ravenholm, a figure appeared on the distant path, Torvald, the hunter who had first challenged the village's insularity. His eyes met Helga's across the distance, a silent acknowledgment passing between them. He carried news of distant lands and shifting tides, but also a newfound respect for the widow who had stood against the darkness. Your courage echoes beyond these woods, he said simply. May your strength be a shield for many. Helga inclined her head, the weight of her journey settling deep within her bones. She knew the road ahead would hold new dangers, new storms to weather. But she was no longer a solitary figure on the edge of a forgotten world. She was a mother, a warrior, a guardian. And the clan of Ravenholm had reclaimed her, not just as one of their own, but as the fierce heart that would keep the shadows at bay. As twilight settled, Helga stood once more beneath the ancient pines, the wind whispering through the branches like a song of old. The amber amulet at her throat caught the fading light, a symbol of love, loss, and unyielding hope. The forest breathed around her, a living, restless thing, forever watching, forever waiting. But Helga was ready, for love was the fiercest shield, the brightest flame against the longest night. And beneath the endless sky, her story, like the ancient runes carved in stone, would endure. A promise etched in shadow and light, carried forward by the hands of those who dared to defy the darkness and choose the dawn. The wind softened, carrying a quiet stillness over the snow-laden pines that stood sentinel around Ravenholm. Helga's breath mingled with the cold air, each exhale a small cloud dissolving into the fading light. She stood alone at the forest's edge, the weight of countless days and nights pressed into her bones. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the pale sky met the distant mountains, the same mountains that once bore witness to her joys and her deepest sorrows. The journey that had begun in desperation had transformed into something neither she nor the clan could have foreseen. What had once been a tale of loss and suspicion now carried the fragile threads of hope and resilience. The scars marked on her skin, the green light lingering in Leif's eyes, and the ancient runes etched in Bjorn's flesh were not merely symbols of a curse. They were reminders of a bond forged through fire and shadow. Helga's mind wandered back to the moments when the village had turned its back on her, the murmurs that branded her mad, the isolation that threatened to break her spirit. Yet, in those dark times, she had discovered a strength born not of steel or magic, but of a mother's unyielding love. It was a force that defied fear and scorn, that challenged the cold indifference of the forest and the merciless reach of the Svartálfar. She thought of Leif, his small hand resting in hers, the strange glow in his eyes now softened but ever present. The boy had survived more than any child should, carrying the mark of shadow deep within him. Yet, he laughed again, learned again, grew again. Proof that even the darkest stains could not extinguish the flicker of life and light. And Bjorn, once a trembling stranger, had found a place beside them, a silent testament to the possibility of healing. The clan, once fractured by fear and doubt, had begun to heal alongside them. Their acceptance was tentative and cautious, but it was real. Gunnar's presence, the runes carved into the village's stones, the whispered prayers of Astrid, their combined will formed a shield not just against the Svartálfar, but against the greater threat of despair and division. Helga's fingers brushed the amber amulet at her throat, the last gift from her husband, Eirik. It was a talisman shaped by memory, love, and sacrifice. In it, she found the courage to face whatever future awaited, a future where shadows would always lurk, but where light, no matter how faint, would endure. The forest breathed around her, ancient and watchful. She knew the Svartálfar's patience was vast, their hunger relentless. The mark they had left upon her son was no simple curse, but a tether, a bond that might one day pull him again into the depths. Yet Helga was ready. The clan stood with her now, their weapons and will united in defense of what was precious and human. The lessons learned through grief and battle had tempered her like steel in a forge. She would not falter. As twilight deepened, the first stars shimmered through the clearing sky. The village's fires flickered faintly in the distance, small beacons against the encroaching night. Helga's heart stirred with a solemn peace. This was a moment carved from the shadows, that uneasy space between fear and hope, between endings and beginnings. She spoke softly into the cold air, a prayer not just for her son or the boy she sheltered, but for all who dared to stand against the darkness. May the gods watch over those who fight unseen battles, she whispered. May the light within us burn brighter than the longest night. Behind her, the forest remained still, silent, waiting, eternal. And within that stillness, Helga understood a truth as old as the land itself. That love, fierce and relentless, was the most powerful force of all. It was not the gods or the runes, the steel of swords or the shadow's terror, but the quiet, unbreakable flame in a mother's heart. As the story of Helga, Thor's daughter, wove itself into the fabric of Ravenholm, it became more than a tale of loss or madness. It was a testament to resilience, to the strength found in the bonds of kinship, and to the courage it takes to face the unknown, not as a hero born of legend, but as a woman whose love refused to yield. And so, beneath the endless sky and the watchful eyes of the ancient gods, Helga stood tall, a guardian of light amid the shadows, a widow who had defied fate, and a mother who would bear any burden to keep her sons safe. In a world where darkness waits patiently at the edge of every dawn, what we carry inside us, the love, the hope, the unyielding will to protect, becomes a shield no shadow can break. If this story touched your soul, If you felt the weight of love and loss intertwined beneath the cold northern skies, then join us for the next chapter. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and become part of a journey that honors the fierce hearts and quiet courage of those who lived and loved in the age of Vikings. For in the end, it is not the shadows that define us.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.